Well, can you turn that up just a bit?
Of course.
We are live, Your Worship.
Great, thank you. All right, council, I'd like to call this regular council meeting of February 13th, 2024 to order with the adoption of the agenda. Someone want to make that motion for me, please? Councilor Cherry, Councilor Devlin, all in favor? Motion's carried. Adoption of the minutes of the regular council meeting of January 23rd. Councilor Devlin, seconded by Councilor Cherry, all in favor? Motion's carried. Any business arising from those minutes? Seeing none, I'm going to move right on to announcements from the mayor. So let's say last week we had a delegation from our sister city in Onocho, Japan, and we were able to help support the school district with tours for both the students and their chaperones at City Hall and in council chambers. I was proud to be able to help with that. I want to thank staff, planning staff, development services, engineering, and building staff for the short-term rental engagement last week. Appreciate that. Community was very appreciative and the way it went, and kudos to again using the Slido app. The questions worked very well. We're really grateful for that. And also most of the community knows, but just go over again, City Hall is being renovated to help accommodate more staff in what used to be finance. So we'll be another 2.5 months getting that done. In the meantime, we are entering the 2nd Street entrance into City Hall and just approach the counter, and one of our staff will take care of you and put you into the right direction. Moving on from that, number 8, recommendations from committee, PIC water restrictions. Someone want to put that motion on the table for me? Councilor Lucelle.
The Public Infrastructure Committee recommends the council that staff implement a citywide water metering program for the 2024 year.
Seconder for that motion, please, Councilor Stapenhurst. Any discussion on that, gentlemen? Do you want to weigh in a little bit?
Yeah. So through discussions, water metering is something that's been a strategic priority and something that we are wanting to move forward. There is interest to look towards industrial and commercial water metering to start, and then a rollout to residential past that. There's obviously no budget in the 2024 budget cycle for this, but getting the plan in place to kind of roll this out across the community and to consider this into the 2025 budgeting cycle for residential.
Good, thank you. Any other comments from council? Councilor Orlando.
Yeah, Your Worship, I did review the agenda for the Public Infrastructure Committee meeting. I don't believe there was any documentation in support of this. My concern here is that I assume this would be a big capital intensive infrastructure project, and that the wording of this resolution is fairly wide open and that staff implement the water metering program. So my question is there any supporting documentation that would show us sort of the scope of the project, steps, timeline, what happens next with this project?
Mr. Black, any comments?
Thank you, Your Worship, and to all of the council. The recommendation for this item came due to water restrictions that were put in place last year, and that given the low snowfall and snowpack that we've seen this year, that it is becoming more and more critical to be proactive in this nature. The implementation of this program will be, as Councilor Orlando described. We will come back to council with a program, a plan, an implementation schedule, a budget for consideration by council and approval by council.
Mm-hmm.
Any other comments, Councilor Lucelle? Anything further?
Yep. So for clarification, we're not approving any spending, any budget, any planning. This is a resolution to move forward with to bring our report forward. Is that everyone's understanding?
Any other comments from council? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Opposed, no motion's carried unanimously. Item number B, please. Someone want to put that to Council Lisa?
As well, the Public Infrastructure Committee recommends to council that staff prepare a discussion paper on the amenity cost charge and development cost charges in relation to the new legislation that the province has developed for a presentation to council.
Seconder for the motion, please, Councillor Stichels. Excuse me. Any further discussion on that? Councillor Cherry.
Thanks, Your Worship. I'm just looking for an update on a timeline for this. Staff or anybody on the committee has one.
Mr. Black, do you have comment? on time?
Thank you, Your Worship, and to all of council. We will be coming back to council with a presentation of the DCC working group, which is composed of a consulting team. I think in the next month and a half, for an update of that. Progress today is projects have been identified that will be supported in the DCC bylaw. The cost estimates are being updated and refined, including parks and recreation. And with the new legislation, there's an amenity cost charge component that may be implemented as a part of or in conjunction with or in parallel with the DCC project. Not certain what the implications of that is or what is eligible. I do understand that there are some community facilities that may be eligible for an amenity cost charge. And so that was the request by or the outcome of our meeting with the PIC is to bring forward what the ACC could look like in conjunction with the DCC.
Awesome, that's perfect. So hold you to spring 2024.
Thank you, yes.
Okay.
Any other questions? Councillor Orlando.
Your Worship, a question through the chair for staff. The ACC is newish tool, part of the larger changes implemented by the province recently. DCC is ongoing project that has a defined timeline. Do you anticipate the discussion paper that looks at the pros and cons of these two different mechanisms will lead to delay at all in the current process for the development cost charges bylaw?
To all of council, as I'm anticipating that we will do these in parallel so that we would not derail or delay the implementation of the DCC program. As the DCC program is well along towards being debated by council and the public. And so the ACC would be a parallel path, which may or may not be completed in the same timeline as the DCC. So I'm dancing around an answer that I'm trying not to delay the DCC implementation with this additional work and considering an ACC.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Councillor Orlando.
Just, Your Worship, just a general comment, and I make it at every opportunity I get. Moving forward with the DCC is a priority. So I understand we have a bit of a spanner thrown into the works with new provincial legislation. However, my view is moving forward with DCCs on a priority basis is very important.
Yeah, thank you for that. Seeing no other comments, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Opposed, motion's carried unanimously. Moving on to 9A, 5-year financial plan bylaw. Someone will put that motion on the table for me, Councillor Cherry.
I move that bylaw number 2377, 5-year financial plan be adopted.
Seconder for the motion, please, Councillor Staples. Any discussion on this? We've adopted first, second, and third readings on the 5-year financial plan, and now it's come to us for adoption. Any questions, any comments? Seeing none, all those in favor? Opposed, motion's carried unanimously. Thank you. Moving on to item 9B, zoning amendment bylaw, floodplain bylaw. Mr. Simon, do you have a high overview of this or basically showing us what's going on, presentation?
There's no formal presentation, but I can give a high level overview of what the bylaw contains if council desires.
If you wouldn't mind, please.
Sure. Thank you, council. So what you have before you today is two amending bylaws, one of them being actually a new bylaw, the floodplain bylaw, and the other one being amendments to the zoning bylaw. So as we're currently operating right now, we have certain portions of the city that fall within a designated floodplain. Within that designated floodplain, we need to make sure buildings are constructed up to a certain height, certain level above sea level, so that in the event of a flood, they wouldn't be damaged. And we also need to make sure that they meet certain setbacks from things like our rivers, dike systems, et cetera. So the way we're currently administering floodplain regulations within the city is by using our zoning bylaw as the tool to do it. And as you can see, the attachments in the report, we have two very small paragraphs about regulating development within the floodplain, which is not nearly enough. So over time, as we've done different reports, we had the 1983 flood inundation study done for the Columbia, the 2008 Big Eddy construction zones report that was done. And then most recently, Mr. Black and his team did a study along the Silhouette River. So we have more information about establishing those flood construction levels in different parts of the city, different setbacks. So it's time that we actually administer this through a formal bylaw rather than having some haphazard regulations within our zoning bylaw that, to be completely honest, are causing a lot of challenges with administration of them and a lot of confusion for people that are building within these parts of the city. So what you have before you is a new floodplain bylaw. Real high level overview of it is you got section 3 that gives clarity on definitions, things like flood construction level, designated flood level, basement, crawl space, habitable area, setback, freeboard. We have section 4 that very clearly identifies the different flood construction levels for different parts of the city. And then when we get into section 6, and this is a really important component, we have exemptions from the floodplain provisions as contained within the bylaw. That's something that we don't currently have, which causes a lot of issues. You can imagine anyone who's in a designated floodplain, anytime they want to build a gazebo, a small accessory building, they come into us, and there's challenges and inconsistencies in interpretation of those guidelines and those bylaw requirements over the years. So this helps clean it up. Those exemptions, I will note, they're based on recommendations from the province that come from a provincial manual that was established in 2004 when management of development in the floodplain was delegated down to local government. So we also have a specific section in the floodplain bylaws proposed to deal with development in the Big Eddy, which is done a little bit differently than other parts of the city. And then lastly, and most critically important, so that we get consistency in how we're applying these rules and make sure we're meeting the Local Government Act, we have a process for if someone doesn't build at the designated flood construction level or can't meet the required setback from a water course, they can go through an exemption process that would come to council for a decision. So this bylaw is really important. It's very technical and it's very much based on engineering studies that have been completed over the years. The most recent one being the 2022 Silhouette study. It's very important that we have this bylaw in place to administer the regulations effectively to reduce liability for the city. If we ever do have a flooding event and the city has not administered its floodplain regulations appropriately, that causes a situation where the city could potentially be liable for any damages as a result. So this helps clean it up and it ensures that no matter who's in planning or engineering or the building department, the regulations will be administered consistently over the years, reducing liability for the city. So happy to answer any questions, and Mr. Black and Mr. Gibbs are also here, who were vital in creating this bylaw as well.
Great. Thanks, Mr. Simon. Any questions for Mr. Simon? Councilor Cherry.
Thanks. Thanks, your worship. I've been contacted by a couple of residents along Willow and Edward. And there seems to be a lot of confusion about what this bylaw does. I'm not quite prepared to ask all of the questions right now. Because I'm still sorting them out. They all came in this morning.
Correct.
Happy attention. It's been a busy day. But I'm wondering if there's an information. If council will be able to do an information session on or consult some of the people in the floodplain area that are going to be affected by this.
Fine, as Mr. Simon said, it's pretty technical. So to do a general information session, you tell me, Mr. Simon, I think it's going to be kind of with all due respect or one off to a particular property to give them the answers. Is that not kind of what I'm hearing you say? Where doing a general engagement session really isn't going to be the best way to get the information out, but engaging with those residents kind of one-on-one to give them the information, how it goes to their piece of property might be the best way to go. And I'll go back in history 25 years ago where we had an issue over in the Big Eddy and nothing was being done because of the floodplain and there was some problems. There was insurance problems. There was all kinds of building issues with that. Looking at this kind of brings us the ability to deal with those issues in a one-off term because it's across the board. We're giving some teeth to the regulations, but going out general engaging Councilor Cherry may not be the way to do it because of its technicalities. I don't know if that answers your question.
It's hit and miss, your worship. If I can, through the chair.
Yes.
Mr. Simon, you mentioned that individual property owners could apply for exemptions. What does an application like that cost and the timelines involved?
Through your worship, the application fees, because we just updated our development approval procedures bylaw to establish the process that these exemption permits would go through. And I believe off the top of my head, fees and charges bylaw, it's somewhere around $1,500 to $1,800. We would require them to submit a report prepared by a qualified professional, so generally an engineer. That report would have to assume liability for the design so that if there ever was a flood, the city is fully indemnified from the project and any losses that would be required. And just going back to the engagement, if I may, your worship, certainly we understand that individuals may have questions and a lot of it really is so property specific. So we would encourage them to come chat with us. And one of the real risks of going out and doing broad stakeholder engagement with a bylaw like this, it's not a bylaw where you're looking at feedback to help inform content. We rely on the professional reports that were submitted to Mr. Black and his team done by qualified hydrogeologists, which is a very specified field. So if we have individuals come in and say, well, this should be exempted or the flood construction level should be lower for this part of the city, if we make any changes that deviate from those technical reports that these professionals have prepared, that they have their liability associated with it supporting those findings, then the city assumes liability if there's any challenges. So, for the planning group, we're always keen on doing a lot of public engagement, but this is a really technical bylaw and it's almost the equivalent of if you throw water metering specs and servicing bylaw, getting public engagement on what those technical specifications for a water meter should be in the city, where it's so specific, and if we deviate, then you're gonna have some liability associated with that.
Mr. Black?
Thank you, Your Worship. Councilor Cherry, we'd be glad to meet with any of the constituents regarding any questions on this. As Mr. Simon indicated, the modeling that was done in order to prepare our knowledge on the Illecillewaet regarding 200-year flood events, climate change, et cetera, those have all been adopted by the city. And so in an arbitrary way, we've already adopted these elevations because we've adopted a master plan that shows what the Illecillewaet flood elevations are. So taking that data set and converting it into the bylaw is really the final step in establishing what the anticipated flood elevations are. And so from a technical point of view, we cannot, as Mr. Simon indicated, tweak it. If there's questions on the implementation, we can certainly answer those questions.
Okay, I appreciate that. You've got me a lot to think about. Could I ask a very specific question on a property while I was doing a drive-by today? Some of the development that's happened on Edward over the last, say, 10 or 20 years has required certain property owners to bring in a ton of fill and build at a higher level, resulting in neighboring properties that were built in the 70s, 80s, basically to be in what essentially will be a puddle. All the water drains onto their property. Their house is a lot lower. My fear is that if we continue with this, those properties are going to be affected negatively, although all new construction will be completely fine, or hopefully. So what I guess best question is to the chair, what sort of liability would the city have in those instances?
Generally speaking, the dike system that was established was as part of the Revelstoke Dam, which was built in
The dam, the Revelstoke Dam? It was built in the eighties. Mica Dam was built in the sixties, early seventies.
And so the establishment of the pond elevation for Arrow Lakes was established when the Keelyside Dam was built down south. And so that established a flood elevation
Do you
based
remember that
upon
number?
the ponding of that lake filling.
Yeah.
And then you have wind fetch, which is the wind blowing up the lake creates a wave that actually will raise the water levels another meter. So that's what established the dike system within the city. And so those homes that are pre-dam and pre-dike are all in the floodplain, and those are the ones that are at risk. They're grandfathered at this point. Our job is to make sure that anything new that gets built is above that, the finished floor is above that flood elevation. And that's why you're seeing the fill being brought in for the newer constructions.
Okay. I appreciate that. I guess my fear is the cost associated with developing some of these properties now. I understand there's a liability and that there's a floodplain restriction, all that. We're talking about a potential 200-year event. Yeah, maybe I'll just reserve the rest of my questions till a little later.
And your worship, the council, we would be glad to sit down with you and discuss this further on a separate basis or individual basis. Again, it's a very technical document, and it's something that planning staff is implementing this, and so it needs to be very, very easily understood, and that's what this new bylaw does. It also makes it simple for homeowners and contractors and developers to also understand the implications of purchasing, building, subdividing, et cetera, in a very concise way. And that's what we're shooting for with this.
Mr. Simon,
To your worship, if I may just add on one component, whenever we get a building permit application, we're certainly aware of the existing development and the proposed new development if structural fill is being brought on to meet certain flood construction level requirements. Through the building permit review, Mr. Gibbs and his team, Mr. Black and his team, stormwater management plan is required for every single building permit that comes in. So staff are really diligent about administering that over the last 4 years now. And the general rule is all stormwater must be contained fully on site to not negatively impact those adjacent properties. So it is a major consideration with any new construction that's coming on when they're built at a higher elevation to not negatively impact not only adjacent properties, but also public infrastructure.
Understood. Through the chair. I guess my fear is what's happened before those 3 and 4 years. And the negative effects that could be compounded with this and new construction as well. With some of those that are sitting below the flood line. But I'll reserve my questions. Let anybody else jump in here.
any other questions from council before we put a motion? Council Lucien.
Thank you, Marshall. I just want to know how this would affect, I know the multiplex, a couple locations have been designated in the floodplains. Will this make that construction harder to do, easier to do? Like you said, this is a technical document, so I have loads of questions.
Through your worship, Councilor Lucio, it'll make it easier in the context that we have more appropriate regulations to provide for the development. And it will provide more clarity of what construction standards need to be met in terms of flood construction level and setback from appropriate waterways. Whether or not, we don't know the actual location of the multiplex yet. So determining, building in the floodplain, how much of an additional cost that's going to provide, it wouldn't be understood at this point. But the effective regulations with this bylaw compared to what our existing regulations are, the only change is based on the 2022 Illicilluit study that was done in terms of the actual flood construction levels. For the Big Eddy and South Side, those flood construction levels aren't changing as a result of this bylaw. It's just more clearly written than it's written in the zoning bylaw right now, with more guidance on how you go through the process of an exemption permit, as well as more guidance on what is exempted from these flood construction level and setback requirements, where we don't have any exemptions right now, which is a major issue for people that are in the floodplain.
Thank you for that. Any other questions? Council Lucien.
Yes, thank you. We'll keep going down the list. You have the maps attached with the different parcels of land. Who owns the parcels of lands in like the greenbelt, kind of out past the mill? just as if we're talking about development, just to know who owns those things, just so we don't accidentally end up with development out on the green belt.
Well, most of that's BC Hydro.
Okay.
Yeah.
And decent amount of trailer parks are in the floodplains. When it comes to stratification or redevelopment, the difference between the 0.6 meter for the Silhouette floodplains and the 3 meter for the Jordan River, what's the difference? Like, why such a huge difference between those two numbers?
Through your worship, the 0.6 meter in the Illecillewaet is the freeboard that gets added onto the designated flood level to establish the flood construction level, and that would have been based on that 2022 Illecillewaet study that was done.
Okay.
Follow
Yeah, just two more. With the golf course being municipally owned and in the floodplain, are we having to apply for exemptions if we need to do any updates on buildings there?
Through your worship, so municipal facilities are generally exempt, but depending on the nature of facilities that are being proposed, and the reason why local government gets exempt from a lot of its own bylaws sometimes is the expectation is we're gonna do things the right way without having to be forced to do that through a permitting system. So the city, I don't think would be recommending if we're gonna be building any, say there was any residential uses or any storage buildings where goods could be damaged by floodwaters in the event of a flood. The city's not gonna wanna build something where it's well below the flood construction level and then we could have an issue on our hands. Sure.
Thank you. And one last one with the rest stop improvements by Modi across the bridge. Will this affect them in any way?
Through your worship, no, there shouldn't be any impact there. From my understanding, we'd have to look at it a little bit more specifically, but again, the confines of the floodplain, notwithstanding some minor tweaks around the Illecillewaet based on the most updated study, isn't changing. And a really good example, and I think council, it's awesome to hear these questions because you're seeing the actual maps embedded as part of the bylaw right now. The only way you would get this information is sifting through some maps in the OCP or looking at our online GIS. Now we have a specific bylaw that we can direct people to. All the mappings in there, it gets very specific for the different areas in the city. And a really good thing is, there's not a lot of changes in the actual regulations as they currently sit and how they're proposed in this bylaw, aside from that guidance for exemptions, additional exemptions actually not being applicable in the bylaw, but it's all in one place. So when you look at the existing ones in the zoning bylaw compared to this bylaw, you can see how much more detailed it is so that people have a lot more guidance on how to go through this process.
Awesome. Thank you very much.
All right, Councilor Orlando, sorry.
Your worship, thank you. I have a couple unrelated questions to staff. The first one is just sort of a practical one related to development process for people who want to be building in the floodplain. I do have, for example, acquaintances who have built in floodplain and had to elevate the property, all that kind of stuff. So just through conversations, had some ideas of how that works, including frustrations around unclarity, my general question is looking forward with this bylaw, how will that change? And are you able to provide specifics on how you feel that will change? And one specific area I'd also like to ask about is, how much are we talking in practicality difference in what was required versus what will be required in a practical sense, cost-based sense, actual height of things versus what we're doing now? Can you sort of run down what the differences will be? And obviously you're proposing this as a better system, so advocating for why you feel it will be an improved process.
Through your worship, Councilor Orlando, so certainly this will provide a lot more guidance and a lot more clear language than as it's currently written in the zoning bylaw. And I can tell you for planning staff as the ones that administer this has been administered inconsistently by staff over the last decade or so, causing frustrations within the community because the regulations as we have them in the zoning bylaw are confusing even for us who work in this day in, day out. So this bylaw will certainly add clarity. So for example, when you go through just the actual designation of the floodplain by section 4.3.1a, referencing the floodplain from the Columbia River, Jordan River, Illecillewaet River, as shown on schedules A, B, that right there just gives people exact guidance on what properties are falling within the floodplain and which specific schedule, and all the schedules have different flood construction levels based on the various reports that have been done over the year, which one is going to be applicable for them. So when you're in the Big Eddy right now, as an example, let's take the Big Eddy. It's really confusing to know what the flood construction level is because it's not actually established in the zoning bylaw. You have to read through the Big Eddy Construction Zones report, which most people don't know how to do, so they hire a contractor to come in and do it. You may have to hire an engineer to go in and do it, sift through that report and make sure that it's in compliance. With this bylaw for someone that's in the Big Eddy right now, flood construction level is 442.01 meters. It's no different from what it was before, but instead of having someone have to sift through that long, lengthy report when they might not be technically savvy enough to do so, it's right in the bylaw, it's right on the map, and very, very clearly to understand what that flood construction level is. So that would just be one example of someone going through the process to understand when this bylaw applies or when it doesn't apply.
Sure, thank you.
Any other questions, Councillor?
Yeah, your worship, and I thank Director Simon for or Mr. Simon for the report. I wanted to the response. I wanted to ask a separate question. So before us today, under item 9B in bylaws is the first thing is the zoning amendment bylaw. So amending our zoning bylaw. The main thrust of that is removing the floodplain wording, and then the second part of what we're doing today is a new floodplain bylaw be read a first, second, and third time so that the wording of floodplain rules and regulations be contained in that bylaw in a separate bylaw, not embedded within the zoning bylaw, as has been explained. But my question is more specific, is that within the amendment we're making to the zoning bylaw, sections 1 through 4 are specifically related to flood control, etc. But starting on number 5, we have things that are, as far as I can tell, not really related. So sort of packaged in with this amendment, including increasing maximum densities in 2 different zones for areas, as well as increasing affordable housing or dwelling unit maximums, and going down to including short-term rental, was it worded as here, addition to permitted uses within residential zones under section 17 and the R1Vs. So I guess my first question is, why is this bundled within a report that contains almost exclusively discussion of floodplains now? And number 2, why is there not discussion of what these changes are about and why they're being bundled here? And then number 3, I guess the question through the chair of staff is, what's going on with these changes? Why are we including them right now instead of as a separate item to be considered independently of the floodplain bylaw?
For your worship, Councillor Orlando, if I may, your worship.
Yes, please.
Items 5 through 8 within zoning amendment bylaw number 2376, they are all only related to cross references. So within each of those sections that are listed in items 5 through 8, you'll see there's a reference where it says section 5.13.1. 5.13.1 throughout. It used to be 5.14.1. But when we remove section 5.12 of the zoning bylaw, the cross references in those sections to what was 5.14 will now be 5.14. There's no content change whatsoever. It's literally just updating the numbering within the bylaw to make sure that those cross references are captured. So you'll notice they start off that cross references in section 5.18 be amended as follows. And I apologize, I should have certainly referenced that in my overview, just for clarity, because I can understand how that could cause some confusion. It's just to make sure that staff are given the direction to change all the appropriate cross references in the bylaw. And section 5.14, as it currently sits in the bylaw, that will be the new 5.13, should council support this bylaw, is related to usable open space. So that's why you see short-term rental and the other one are density bonusing provisions within the zoning bylaw. It's literally just updating cross references. That's all it is.
Okay.
Yeah.
Your worship, if I could ask a follow-up question through the chair. In the staff report, there was a tracked changes report included that showed track changes, and the number changes were the cross-referencing numbers were included with strike-throughs, et cetera, to show those changes. However, there were also wording changes that were similar to the other changes as related to the section that was deleted for floodplain bylaws. I think for clarity for myself as well as the public, that those 2 changes could also be included, and just for verification, all of those cross-references, except for the last one, number 8, is that correct? Or 7 and 8, have previously been made within past amendments to the zoning bylaw and are just carrying forward with an older version of the document as we're doing it. Yeah, okay.
Through your worship, literally nothing more than administrative cleanup, and I can work with the corporate officer after if this is confusing for council. We can see if it's legally permissible for us to add something in the bylaw where it's just a blanket reference, update all appropriate cross references and numbering in the zoning bylaw accordingly. Because when we make these changes, it really does sometimes wreak havoc on the cross referencing that's already contained within the zoning bylaw, as well as the formatting and the numbering. And in speaking with Director Floyd, we wanted to make sure that everything was appropriately tracked so that in the future, if people were wondering what the changes entail, that we got every nook and cranny of the detail in the bylaw.
Thank you.
Any other questions from council? Councilor Cherry, then Councilor Lucy.
Your worship, to the chair, Mr. Simon, you mentioned that there was no change in elevation of the floodplain in the Big Eddy.
Through your worship, for the Big Eddy, no, the only change is the flood construction level for the Illecillewaet River, which was based on the 2022 study.
Can you remind everybody here and anybody listening that's paying attention and interested what the change is?
For the Illecillewaet River, through your worship. Through your worship, off the top of my head, the Illecillewaet River, instead of having a static flood construction level for a portion of the properties that are on the south side of the diking system, I believe, Mr. Black, correct me if I'm wrong. Sorry.
Is that the Edward side?
No, that would be the opposite side. So everything north of the dike still stays at 442.25 flood construction level, and everything south of the dike, and then a small portion on the eastern side of the Illecillewaet River for the northern part of the dike, kind of near the wastewater treatment plant. You would have change in flood construction levels where it's based as you're going further west along the Illecillewaet River, the flood construction level decreases, I believe. And so it's different along different points of the Illecillewaet River based on that 2022 study. So we used to have a static flood construction level of 42.25 for the whole area. Now it's changed slightly based on that study where it's a little bit higher as you move further west than it is.
If I can.
Yes.
Apologize, everybody. I know they're technical. The 442.5, how long has that been entrenched in our bylaws?
Through your worship, since 1983 is my understanding.
Mr. Black.
If I might add, isn't this fun? So anything basically downstream of the 4th Street Bridge is controlled by the pond elevation of the dams. Everything above the 4th Street Bridge is controlled by the river hydraulics because it's flowing at a steeper slope. And so if the water's here, obviously it decreases as you go downstream, but below the 4th Street Bridge, it's a lake. And so that's why it's pretty much static below the 4th Street Bridge, because BC Hydro controls that. And by their, and I'm not sure if it's a bylaw, but their requirements, that is the maximum pool elevation that they can provide, except in an emergency. So that anything below the 4th Street Bridge is controlled by BC Hydro, above is by Mother Nature and river slope and hydraulics.
Gotcha. I've got a bunch of really technical questions that nobody's gonna want me to ask here.
Please, feel free to come and sit down with us. I seriously, this is my favorite stuff.
I'd love to, and I'll probably take you up on that. My only fear is that we're presented first, second, and third reading as an option here today. And I'd be worried on rushing that. I understand that you guys, want to move this forward, but just I've got a few questions.
And Councillor, that's certainly your discretion. Please consider though that we cannot tweak these numbers.
Okay.
These numbers are fixed by professional engineers who are taking the liability for this, and this is what the province demands we do as part of managing floodplains. And this is really a consequence of the Sumas Prairie flooding of a couple of years, right? And so, from a technical point of view, we're pretty much fixed. Discussion, we can do that easily.
No, thank you, I understand that, gives me some motivation to go on here.
All right, I'll ask one last time, Councilor Lana.
Just an observation on the discussion about communication for second, and third readings. Staff wanting to move ahead and the nature of this report, which is engineering and technical based and not open for political wrangling of water levels don't respond to that. So I'm suggesting a middle path here in terms of communications, and that, you know, we don't want to open it up to a public hearing or sort of a public forum where everyone chips in, because that's not going to be fruitful if you're not going to will the level of the water down. And why ask people for the feedback on those types of things. However, if there are technical documents or technical questions, I should say, that people have and want to know about things, I would suggest that maybe there's an opportunity moving forward, maybe not on this bylaw, but on other bylaws, as we use technology like we did for the housing open or the short-term rental open house we had last week, to open it up and just say, hey, we're accepting technical questions, put a preface at the top saying, you know, a lot of these things are set in stone. We're not really seeking feedback here, but, you know, can this help put your concerns to bed? Because I think what I am seeing from a market demand is people are like, oh my God, I have questions about this. I want to know what's going on. And if we allow them that opportunity to assuage their fears or concerns ahead of time, or maybe confirm their fears and concerns ahead of time, then on the whole, I think people feel better about that and feel that they're more engaged in this governance and can get their questions answered. And then on the other hand, it you know, takes a bit of pressure off of political staff to be the interveners on these things. And the last thing I want to say on this detail is that if you open these Q&As, frequently asked questions, up to the public, then we don't have, staff doesn't have to be repeatedly answering them. And we can also make a show of the fact that we have answered these questions by saying, hey, check a look at our webpage here, that kind of stuff. So just thinking out loud about opportunities to improve these processes and save people time and grief.
Great, appreciate your comment. All right, let's get this motion on the table for me, please. Someone want to make that motion? Councilor Lucio, before we go, did you have a question?
No, I didn't.
My apologies. Councilor Dublin.
Move the floodplain bylaw number 2369 be ready first, second, and third time.
We're gonna go right back to zoning amendment bylaw. We need to read
Sorry.
that first.
I scrolled down.
Thank you.
I will move that zoning amendment bylaw number 2376 be read first, second, and third time.
Seconder for that motion, please, Councilor Lucio. Any further discussion on the zoning amendment bylaw? Seeing none, all those in favor? Opposed? No, motion's carried. Now, number two.
Now I will move that floodplain bylaw number 2369 be ready for second and third.
Seconder for the motion, please, Councilor Cherry. Any further discussion on this motion? Seeing none, all is in favor? Opposed? No, motion is carried. Thank you. Thank you for the oversight, staff and council. Thank you for the consideration. All right, moving on to item 11, staff reports, Columbia Park active transit. Mr. Black, do you have an overview of this, or are you okay with us moving forward?
Oh, Worship, I'd love an overview, if that's
Okay, Mr. Black, come on up. You're halfway there now. Thanks.
Thank you. I unfortunately did not have a formal presentation for this. However, this is a supplement to the adoption of the Transportation Master Plan and the desire to create a network that encompasses Revelstoke from north to south. Currently, we've got a multi-use path network that goes from basically downtown with the one gap at airport on Nickel between airport and park. And the mountain will be building them up that goes all the way through to the resort and eventually, I hope, down towards Williamson and back along Airport Road. But to formalize opportunities for construction of a multi-use path network in Columbia Park, as there is no network at this time. In addition, we have the Greenbelt Trail, which ends at the Highway 1 bridge, which needs to be extended and to provide a safe network so people can use the Greenbelt to get to and from Columbia Park to the city core, which we currently do not have. So this report was commissioned to come up with some concepts, which if council chooses to move forward with consideration and adoption of this for next year's budget, then we can begin to implement this project. It will build on the Safe School project and connecting Perks, Colbeck to the Greenbelt to Highway 23 North to eventually the park, the small park adjacent to the river. And a huge money, no object idea, hopefully up to the Forestry Museum one day. So this is a network that is the basis of a future for Columbia Park. With your consideration and adoption of this, we can then budget for it and start to implement those connections to make Columbia Park pedestrian friendly and to make sure that we can get kids to and from school off of the roads, especially in the winter.
Council, questions? Councilor.
Your worship, just one question. The report itemizes the different sections of the trail, the network, and puts estimates associated with them. When do you think, so how do you anticipate making decisions about what comes first and second, and how you prioritize those projects if they are moved forward to consideration for the 2025 budget?
I would. Through your worship, Council. I would suspect that the most prudent way of doing it is just to allocate X dollars per year for that area and then let staff work within those funding considerations to build a logical network. In my opinion, that would be to start extending the Greenbelt Trail to LaForme and towards the golf course first. Again, to start building a network so that people don't have to be on LaForme. If we can get up Perks and Colbeck, that would be the next piece, in my opinion. It would then bring to the school and then continuing up where we have bus stops on Perks. And so building a pedestrian network so people, again, do not have to be on the road. So typically, that is what we've done with the, and I shouldn't use typically, but that is the strategy that we've used for the multi-use paths on Airport Road, Nickel. And we'll be looking for grants, active transportation grants too, which play a significant role in this, in addition to tourism dollars that go towards supporting these sorts of things. So it would not just be general taxation that we'd be looking towards. And the list is there. Again, what's available, what makes sense is how we would drive it. And typically it wouldn't be, we're gonna do this piece. I would suggest we would do, this is how much money we got. This is our next priority, and build it top down, so to speak, from where we have an existing network and extend it logically.
Thank you.
Okay. Any other questions? Councilor Chair.
Just a comment, Your Worship, building off what Director Black just said about passing this now so we can get a plan for the future and continue to go for grant applications and tourism funds. I'd like to give them the most opportunity as possible, and in the sense of how much time they have for that, and in favor of this.
Great, appreciate it.
And Your Worship, if I may, I'm sorry. As you stated, it's critical for us as a community in order to get grants is to have these plans in place. It's always nice to wave your hands and wish for something, but the province doesn't like that. They want to know that we have a plan that we've got budgeted for, that we're looking for the future, and it's been adopted by council. And so the transportation master plan is the base, the foundation of this. This is the bricks that help build that future.
I appreciate that comment, because we're seeing how well, when we have plans, that we can actually prepare things, especially in the budget process. All right, someone want to put the motion on the table for me, please, Councilor Lando.
Yeah, I move that the recommendations in the Columbia Park Active Mode Improvements Report prepared by McElhaney dated October 31st, 2023 be considered during the 2025 budget process.
Second for the motion, please, Councilor Lucelle. Any further discussion on the motion? Seeing none, oh, Councillor Orlando, go ahead.
Just a quick note, we're working on Fourth Street from the bridge to downtown. This takes we're working on bike accessible trails, safe pathways. Where this is over in Columbia Park. It's great to see us, linking all the parts together for accessible and active transportation network across the city and making all those connections. It's just really exciting.
Great, appreciate that. All those in favor? Motion's carried unanimously. Thank you. Moving on to item 11B, shuttle contract. Someone want to put that motion on the table? Or do you have anything you want to put forward first, Mr. Black?
Just very briefly, your worship, I'm pleased to say that this agreement is finally in front of you. It was due to you in December. However, travel, Christmas, et cetera, got in the way. The contract that is before you has been executed by the resort, by tourism, the Resort Accommodation Association. And so the last step in executing this contract for the remainder of the year is our city signatures on this agreement. And lastly, that has no impact on general taxation.
Perfect. Councilor Cherry.
Thanks, Your Worship. I just want to make note of everything here. Make note of one thing here for everybody. That in this agreement, RMR has agreed to support up to $15,000 for additional services for a total of $200,000, such as late night bus extension service to 2:30 in the morning on weekends,
Yes.
on mornings and weekends. This is something that many residents in Arrow Heights and living at RMR around there have had a petitioning or lobbying some of us councilors about. So I'm happy to see that that's happened. I just want to give thanks out for everybody working together on that.
Thank you, and if I might add, that program will be implemented starting Friday.
Oh, amazing.
And it'll last for the end of the ski season, and then we'll work with our partners on seeing whether that's something that needs to be extended on a year-round basis on weekends till 2:30 in the morning, so that people can actually get here, enjoy the evenings to the late wee hours, and still get home without waiting for a cab or walking.
And that's really actually very important, and thanks for bringing that up, Councilor and Mr. Black. That's definitely what we've seen, but we've been involved in the city in different degrees over the years. The problem about getting people home has been there for the last 25 years, and so just to see this come to fruition is pretty awesome.
And if I can, Your Worship, is that for all routes?
Just the Route 5, so that's Columbia Park to the resort.
Great. All right, Councilor Devlin, will you put this on, please?
Hi, sir. I will move that the mayor and chief administrative officer be approved to enter into a partnering agreement between the city of Revelstoke, Revelstoke Mountain Resort, Revelstoke Accommodation Association, and Revelstoke Connection Limited, doing business as Everything Revelstoke, for the provision of a resort shuttle service beginning on December 1st, 2023, and terminating on the 30th day of November, 2024, with the option to renew for one additional year.
Second for the motion, please. Councilor Cherry. Any further discussion on this motion? Seeing none, all those in favor? Motion's carried unanimously. Thank you. All right, moving on to 11C, Parks and Rec. Mr. Nato, do you have anything to add to or overview for this lease agreement, Visual Arts Center?
No, Your Worship, I do not. I'm happy to answer any questions should council have.
All right. So someone want to put item number 1 on the table for Councilor Cherry?
Move that the lease agreement with the Revelstoke Visual Arts Society for the property located at 320 Wilson Street and 1702 3rd Street West be approved for a 5-year term.
Second for the motion, Councilor Lucille. I'm just going to note that they are currently in our tenants in that place, and 320 Wilson is the building, and 1702 3rd Street is the parking area. Any other comments from council?
Just a quick question, Your Worship.
Yes.
For the 5-year term, was that city led, or is that a standard, or is that visual arts? I've got that one.
Mr. Nato, comment?
Through your worship, that is standard renewal term. Anything, we cannot go longer than 5 years because we are investing funds into the building. So it's just a 5-year term.
Perfect, thank you for simple answer.
Councillor London.
Your worship, just my comments. I'd like to thank the Revelstoke Visual Arts Society for taking this on. This, as a former RCMP detachment building is, in my view, a liability. And I'm just really impressed at what they've been able to do over the years by attracting grant funding and making improvements to the building in partnership, in combination with the excellent programming and just vitality of the center down there and all the improvements they've made around there. So landscaping is just really great to see. I remember years ago, there was concern about, prior to their having these sort of agreements in place, is this building viable and whatnot, and they've just done an awesome job, and I just can't thank them enough for all the work they've done.
Great. Any further comment? Any other comments from Councillor Cherry?
Yes, your worship, just moved on me. Just to add to that, the Revelstoke Visual Arts Center is always looking for funding opportunities. They do have one coming up between February 15th and 29th. It's the Anything Goes annual art auction. So just want to let everyone know they should go check it out.
Perfect. Appreciate it. All right, I'm going to call a question on the lease agreement. All in favor? Opposed? No, motion's carried unanimously. Part number 2. So Councillor Devlin, would you like to put this on? It's lengthy again. Councillor Cherry, did you want to do that?
I really don't. I'd rather-
I'll move that notice be given of the city's intention to dispose of an interest in a portion of land located at 320 Wilson Street and 1702 3rd Street West via lease agreement to the Revelstoke Visual Arts Society in the amount of $50 for a 5-year term from April 1st, 2024 to March 31st, 2022.
Seconder for the motion, Councillor Lucero. Any discussion on this motion? I'll call a question. All those in favor? Opposed? No, motion's carried unanimously. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Nato and Ms. Floyd, putting these things in place. Appreciate that. All right, we're going to move on to item 11D, multiplex update. So I'm going to go to Mr. Parliament, Mr. Nato, to do that update. Mr. Parliament, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So I'm not going to repeat sort of the summary of my report that's before you tonight. There's no need to repeat it. I can certainly answer any questions. Staff are trying to push this project along, respecting the size and scope and the magnitude of this project. We at the staff level recognize that the life expectancy of the grand old lady called the Revelstoke Forum is on borrowed time. And what we're attempting to do is meet that priority of council to have that facility replaced, juggling all the challenges that go with it. Cost being number 1, timing being probably number 2, design, public engagement right up there as well. We see this RFP to be phase 2 of public consultation, narrowing down what are our anticipated users, narrowing down a concept design, narrowing down a Class C cost estimate. And before I turn it over to Lori to talk specific about the RFP, I just want to remind council that we're not even talking about detailed design drawings yet. We're not even talking about tender documents. We're not talking about construction. We don't even know the size and scope of this facility, but typically during a conventional process like this, you come up with a concept design, you establish what we call a crude budget. Is it phased? What are the users of the facility? And once you establish a crude budget, then you get to a Class C cost estimate, which is really just that. It's an estimate. To give you an idea, Class A would be actual figures in a tender document, where Class D is very generic. Class C is a little bit more detailed. We're hoping to get to Class C. And the design work allows you to get a firm grasp on what the cost would be. And then we look at a budget and funding elements. And of course, we also want to look at potential funding models. What type of funding model are we looking at for the capital? What type of funding model are we looking at the operating et cetera, et cetera. We don't know the location yet. So part of this RFP will be delving into the conceptual design. We'll be talking about different options, engaging with the public. Just basically phase 2 of the consultation process that we launched last year. So I'm certainly here to answer any questions because it's important for me that council have a clear understanding of what this RFP is about, where we are on this large public works project. So with that, Mr. Mayor, I can certainly turn it over to sort of part 2 of the report. Our Director of Recreation and Parks, who's sort of handling the mechanics of the RFP along with Director Steve Black. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Neto.
Thank you, Your Worship. So just adding to what Mr. Parliament has said. So this is really just phase 2 that we're building upon the information we received from phase 1. So this will be the next step in really nailing down what we're building, where we're building it, the users involved, the costing implications with this type of build. So we've taken some time to draft the RFP. So through various staff members involved and just reviewing other feasibility studies for this type of project, we've crafted an RFP that we think will work for us. So it was presented to the Public Infrastructure Committee meeting in November. So they had some questions. I made some minor tweaks to the RFP based on their feedback and went back to staff, kicked it around again. And decided to post it in February when we felt that it would accurately reflect what we were trying to accomplish. I've outlined the timelines for the RFP. The RFP document is posted on the Bonfire portal, so it's accessible to anyone that wants to view the documents. If you have any specific questions about the RFP, I can do my best to answer them. Did we want to start with that in terms of the RFP?
I think that's appropriate. Any questions from council regarding the RFP? So standard procedure with these sorts of things, Mr. Neto, is that this sort of thing comes to council. We talk about kind of general terms, what we're going to do for a feasibility study. The staff usually goes ahead, puts the RFP out to get the feasibility study done, and then comes back to council with what we've heard. That's sort of the procedure. Is that correct? In general
I think
terms?
the procedure varies depending on the project.
Okay.
I don't know that we've taken scopes of work to council before for an RFP. The budget was brought forward, or the capital spending request for the next step was brought forward to council during the budget deliberations. So we've gone ahead and crafted the RFP. Not to say that we can tweak it if council has some concerns with something that's in the RFP. It's easy enough to issue an addendum to make that change and advise any prospective proponents of the change. That can all be done through the Bonfire portal. Yeah, I don't really know that I can add more about that because I think it varies between projects. I have numerous RFPs that have been on the Bonfire portal that haven't come directly to council. The award of the contract will definitely come to council when we're at that time, but as for the scope of services, I don't believe I've taken one to council before.
Okay, well, thanks for that clarification. Yeah, that's kind of what I was. Any questions from council regarding the process so far? Councilor Roman.
Yeah, your worship, through the chair. I will say that the RFP did catch me unawares. I didn't anticipate that. The reason for that is back in, I believe, late September, Committee of the Whole, we passed a resolution when a steering committee was proposed for staff to come back and suggest alternate options. I think why that's of relevance is that one of the feelings, at least that I expressed at the time when that was sort of put back for further consideration, is it was limiting the scope of the project to specific uses. So it was not potentially including other uses in there. So that was the nature of the discussion. I have reviewed the minutes for several public infrastructure committee meetings. I did not, for example, see a resolution coming from the committee related to this. So when we do approve the minutes, as it's mentioned in there, I'm looking for resolutions coming forward. And as far as I saw, there were none. In addition, although the RFP might have been discussed in person at the Public Infrastructure Committee meeting, I didn't see it in there. I did see some reports that are linked in the reports here as well. So at the end of the day, to summarize it, so also the Talk Revelstoke has not been updated since midsummer, according to July of last year. So I guess this is, from the same starting point and a view that I've expressed several times before, is that when I read the RFP, it seems to have in its wording made that decision about what will and will not be included in the proposed new multiplex facility. Now that could be open for interpretation, but in the readings I see, we're going to have this, and this in here. So to come up with a plan based on that, and that seems to be by resolution of council something we express concern about, or at least need for future discussion, and that was going to come back next for council. But there's a feeling that we may have leapfrogged that on there. And to summarize, what I'm trying to do is get community buy-in and make everyone feel that they're on board with the project and know what's going on as it proceeds through stuff. So my question would be, in terms of resolutions, why aren't we seeing those through council, like the PIC resolutions coming through, and including some of the attendance at some of those PIC meetings? There were like half attendance, so only a couple members were there. I guess other people were away, so that's a concern.
Thank you. Any councilor, Mr. Parliament, sorry.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So good questions. Thank you, Councilor Orlando. I had the opportunity to be briefed earlier by some of these concerns. I think there's a governance question here that we need to be aware of, and that has to do with the sort of the structure of our committees and how the committee work is reported back to council in a very clear and transparent way. Yes, the minutes reflect that it was discussed, but technically there was no resolution in the PIC, the Public Infrastructure Committee. If there was a resolution in a perfect world, the members of council that sit on the committee report back to all of council and basically update all of council that the committee looked at this item. There's the resolution supporting that initiative. And for the most part, council, by adopting the minutes, default adopt the contents of that committee meeting. And that did not happen. There was no actual official resolution. There was a discussion of the RFP. So noted for sure. In terms of the September request from council to have the steering committee report back or have staff report with a draft TOR in terms of reference of the steering committee, it's itemized in this staff report. It's recommended by the director that it can run concurrent with the RFP. We felt at the staff level to create a terms of reference, to appoint people to a steering committee in the absence of a consultant, in the absence of phase two, to someone guide us through this next step would be a little premature. So let's run it concurrently. But back to the governance question, a question back to council is, we have multiple committees, and I want to make sure council fully understands the role of those committees and the role of the individual councilors sitting in those committees to report back to council. So no one on council is surprised, and we could do better. And I did take your comment about that seriously, and I have looked at that. And there is some inconsistencies on how some of the committees report back by way of resolution. There is no resolution. There was just a verbal discussion. I've seen it in other committees. So that's sort of a sidebar comment, Mr. Mayor. But I do recognize some of the confusion with that. And so all I know as a CAO for this large project, we want to make sure that you 7 on council are fully aware, because of course it's all about letting the public know what our next steps are as we inch closer toward an inevitable referendum and a funding model that works for everybody.
Okay, appreciate that. Any other comments from Mr. Parliament or Ms. Donato? Councilor Orlando?
Your worship, a question: does the RFP in its wording specify what will and will not be included in the proposed multiplex.
Yeah. To answer that, I have read sort of phase one and the work that was done by the Tofola Group last year. And you know, when we went out to the people, and I think we just had under 400 respond, saying they would like the following. And so we sort of got a general idea of the 400 who came back that they would like the following, and we talk about that in the report. We're not bound by that. What phase two will do is narrow down the details and the conceptual design, what the cost implications are, talk about possible phasings. So whatever's said in phase one and is suggested that we do, whether it's a running track, whether it's a climbing wall, gymnasium space, 1 sheet, 2 sheets of ice, a curling club, plus, phase two will bring more reality to the table. Here are your cost implications. Here's options to phase it. Here's options to fund it. So we're not bound by anything in phase one. It was suggested by the people that this would be nice in a new facility, but what they don't know is the cost. And should we phase some of these things? Because in a perfect world, we would love to all have the users come together and build an incredible facility in one fell swoop. But I can tell you and the public, we can't afford that. And so we have to be cognizant of that. Phase two will answer a lot of those questions. So again, I'm hoping phase two, at the end of phase two, when we complete this report and it comes back to you, we'll have more of a detailed answer on what users are going to be part of this facility, what are the cost implications, and the potential phasing.
Follow-up question, Council?
Yeah, your worship, I do thank you, I appreciate it. And just to follow up on that, and Mr. Parliament, I do appreciate the response. Do you anticipate that through this feasibility study process, there will be more outreach and engagement? And you know, because as a point, although the initial Tofola Group report indicated 400 respondents or whatnot, when you looked in detail at what came down on the Excel spreadsheet, including the feedback, it's closer to 150 people went through that, and that was conducted over a hockey weekend at the provincial championships. And so this was a short time frame, asking hockey people what they want in the replacement. What my concern is that the rest of the community who might be able to buy into this the various user groups have not been included or have not been aware that that was the point to talk about it. And I just want to also emphasize that your concern that you expressed right now is also my concern, is that there's the Dream multiplex arena, and that's going to be extremely expensive. And what we're seeing consistently in municipalities our size across BC is that when by law, as we have to by law, we go to a borrowing bylaw, they fail. The public kicks it back. So we need to be walking on broken glass right now, making sure we are attracting all of those stakeholder and user groups in there, because if they can't see themselves in that facility and feel they never had a chance at these early stages, then we run the risk of failing at a mandatory referendum. So I do appreciate those comments.
Yeah. Just quickly, Mr. Mayor, in response, there's the scope and the schedule, and the scope talks about the wants, right? I mean, the scope and the size and the scope of the facility and all the wants and the desires of the community. The schedule talks about the time. Is this going to be 5 years, 8 years, 12 years out? The time to generate the necessary funds, the time to get the necessary electoral consent, etc. And of course, the standards of this new facility. We'll talk about the quality, and we're going to get all of those questions answered in phase two. But to Councillor Orlando's concern and point about making sure that we bring everyone to the table is critical, and we share that at the staff, because I am aware of the failed referendums. I am intimately aware of some of these projects that have failed in other jurisdictions, when we have to go to the public and ask for support, and that's by way of conventional debt. And if you do not, at the local government level, engage all users on a multiplex facility, you are most likely going to fail on the electoral consent vote. And the legislation is simple. If you finance any capital over 5 years, you must receive electoral consent. We know that we're going to be funding this project more than 5 years, so that's inevitable. Its council's made it clear that the AAP is off the table, the alternative approval process, that we're gonna be taking the referendum route. To get to the referendum, it's critical that we make sure that the scope and size and the schedule is properly adhered to. And again, phase two, this consultant to be awarded this job, their job is to answer those questions so council feels comfortable moving to the next step and making sure all users are brought into play. A multi-purpose facility is more than just hockey, but what we need to determine is the size, whether we can afford it, how can we phase it? So when we put together a funding model, we can then go to the people and say, what do you think?
Thank you. Follow up? Yeah, Mr. Nunn.
Through you, Richard, just to add that one of the deliverables in the RFP is a communication engagement strategy as well. So we'll be looking at those details when we review the bids to ensure that we're satisfied with the level of engagement.
Thank you.
Anything else that you'd like to add, Mr. Parliament, or Mr. Nunn?
Good, thanks.
All right, thank you. Appreciate the update. All right, we are going to move on to communications. So Public Infrastructure Committee minutes. Councilor Luciano, any comment?
Besides the things that we already talked about, I think one thing to note is water lining. So Director Black has we were the first city in the province to complete a water lining project. It was resulted in us not having to dig up the infrastructure to replace the pipe, just relining it. They're old iron pipes that still deemed to be in good shape. And we're hoping to be able to do this throughout the city in sections that are applicable for this.
Appreciate that. Any other comments from councilors? Councilor Chen?
Yeah, thanks, your worship. Really interested in this. I'm wondering what sort of limitations that anybody knows about using these in future projects.
Anybody knows about, or Mr. Black?
I could guess.
Thank you, Your Worship. And many of you have been in the engineering office and seen some of the iron pipe that we've got in there that's been tuberculated. So it's got these iron nodules in the inside, which has decreased the capacity of the pipe. It's basically created a very rough surface, like very coarse sandpaper, which is emery cloth. What that means is that the water can't pass through that pipe in a very efficient way. So utilizing this technology, we've been able to go and pull basically a chimney scraper through the pipe to completely clean the inside. We then video it, and then we pull an epoxy resin through the pipe with a spinning head that then coats the whole inside of this pipe and creates a new, very low friction surface for the water to flow. What it does is it reduces the cost of the pipe replacement program by about half. We don't end up with 3 weeks of pipe digging up a block of road. We have to dig 2 pits at either end. We did a project, one with the iron pipe and one with the asbestos cement pipe in Lower Arrow Heights. Both very successful. We saw about a 30% increase in water pipe capacity and able to carry more volume, which means that in some cases we may not have to upsize pipes in the future. And the iron pipe especially had very little wear, even though it was 70 or 80 years old, which is about the lifespan of typical iron pipe. But we're blessed here with very good soil that doesn't eat the pipe. So there's very little corrosion on the outside. The wall thicknesses were almost perfect, almost like brand new. And so by doing this, we can get another 50 years of life, we think, out of these pipes without having to completely replace them. And by then the technology may be that we can do it again if the pipes are the same. So we can do more, we have less impact to the community, and the cost is a little bit cheaper than replacing the whole road, digging up and inconveniencing the public. So very successful program, and we will be implementing it again this year.
Any
Thanks,
questions?
I was just gonna say, thanks, Director Black. I share the same excitement you do on this one, so that's why I wanted the update. very much.
Good, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Blanc. Moving on to Public Art Committee minutes, Council Chair.
Thanks, your worship. We've had some correspondence with the Revelstoke Fairware for a Greenbelt project. Fairware would like to create an educational piece along the Greenbelt utilizing art educational plaques. Primary focus will be educating the public about bears and other local wildlife, as well as invasive species. We had a Luna 2023 debrief, where it was noted that the event appeared to be scaled back in comparison to prior years, and that most displays were concentrated in the central downtown core. The members expressed support for spreading the event throughout town. Some of the new items are the wind phone proposal, apologies. Members commented favorably on the design, the choice of materials, and the maintenance. There were just a few concerns regarding impact on construction on wildlife. Yeah, sorry, I should also mention that the Hospice Society planned to present the design to neighboring property owners and the Indigenous Friendship Society report back to staff. And then we discussed public art and roundabouts as potential art installations in the Wright Street roundabout. Unfortunately, there is no timeline for it at this time, but looking forward to how that pans out. One that people might like or dislike, the historical light poles that are being removed. We're going to try to use them and repurpose them for art projects around town.
Okay, great. Like recycling, however. Yeah, that's good. Thank you for that. Any other comments from council? And none, I'm going to move on to youth advisory, Councilor Lusar.
Thank you, Mayor Schultz. Yes, we had an update from Ainsley, the youth liaison. She's the one doing all the work in high school with all these kids. Biggest thing was the LGBTQ community. They have the Rainbows and Allies group, and just seeing more events with them, as well as more support around the community. It is a hard group to be a part of, so anywhere that we can be inclusive, it's appreciated. We also had the Youth Initiative Committee meeting, so that was scheduled at the end of January. We had 18 people come out, and we discussed youth and what we want to do as organizations and members assisting youth. So the top 5 priorities for us this year were volunteer leadership and employment opportunities for youth, removing financial barriers for them when it comes to accessing sports and other programming, mental health supports, art programming. So there is an abundance of sports programming for youth, but just looking to expand arts programming, whether that's visual arts, technology arts, culinary arts, stuff like that, and consent and healthy relationship education. So those were the top 5 things that we had noted from that meeting.
Great, thank you for that. Any questions regarding the youth advisory? Seeing none, thank you. We're going to move on to the application for the UBCM Fire Smart. So we received a letter, and Chief DeRossi is here. And Chief, do you want to speak to the letter we received from UBCM, basically granting the grant you applied for?
Thank you, Your Worship. Yes, I'm very excited to be speaking with you today and just announce that the application for the 2023 Community Resiliency Investment Program for the Fire Smart Community Funding was successful. So that's an amount of $190,000 and change to create a series of opportunities to interact with the public, get our Fire Smart representative out into the community doing those home ignition assessments. You'll see them at the farmers market this year. We're looking at getting some information to the residents for the neighborhood recognition program. A couple of things to highlight here. We're looking at this grant includes the development of a community wildfire resiliency plan for Revelstoke. We'll be able to get a lot more information and take steps to delve into that side of things as the climate has changed on us. There's also some what do we call this? Managing. There's a $35,000 local rebate program included in this. And so that's one of the things I'm really excited to announce. People can look for that in the near future. We'll be making announcements to that. There's a whole bunch of steps that you have to go through to get part of that. We're really excited about that. And of course, last but not least, we're going to have a fun day at the fire hall with activities and refreshments and an opportunity for people to learn more about Fire Smart.
Great, thank you, Chief. Any comments from council for Chief Thurston? Seeing none, thank you, Chief, appreciate it, and we are very pleased that you applied for the funds and that we're in receipt of it. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right, good, we are gonna move on. Ms. Delaselle, do we have any questions from the press?
No questions from the press, Your Worship.
All right, thank you. I would like to move in camera pursuant to section 90.1 A, D, and E of the community charter. Someone want to make that motion for me? Councillor Staples, Councillor Devlin, all in favor? Motion's carried. We'll take a 10-minute break and we'll be back in camera. Thank you.